purely by chance after trapping 2 rats in the attic. They were after corn cobs my wife used for Thanksgiving decoration. All this stuff must go, so I took it to the dump. It was then I discovered the photos taken during the time I was a combat photographer in Vietnam. Reviewing those photos and reading books on Vietnam like Bruce Hutchinson's An American Amnesia made me revisit those days almost 50 years ago. I was drafted into the Army on June 15, 1966 at the age of 24. I was an old guy. Most of the soldiers in Vietnam were 19 or 20. Since I was working as a lifeguard at LA City beaches, I tried to get on as a pool lifeguard at the base of Fort Ord. It made sense to do something new, but things didn't work out that way. After 8 weeks of basic, 8 weeks of infantry training, I got orders to go to Fort Benning, Georgia. When I got there, the processing clerks, surfers from Huntington Beach, tried to get me to stay there working as a clerk and going to Florida with them on the weekends to surf. Who would want to turn that down? 2 days later, our platoon met with the training sergeant. He told us the 49th Scout Dog Unit was being reactivated since 50% of the casualties in Vietnam were from mines, booby traps, and ambushes. He stated a machine gunner has 10 seconds to live when he opens up with a machine gun in a battle. You, gentlemen, have half that time. Those are my options. After praying, this scripture came to mind, Psalm 23:4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. I decided that working with the dogs was what I should do. I was blessed to be an American. Helping Vietnam, a newly formed democratic nation, was where I could help. I trained the dogs for 5 months. We taught them how to stay, sit, heel, detect mines, booby traps, and ambushes, and respond to hand signals. The dogs had to learn how to crawl, staying low to the ground so they wouldn't become targets. We also had to train them not to bark, since this could give away our position and endanger the infantrymen. My dog Prince was really good in training. He could detect booby traps 100 yards away. He could hear the slightest air passing by a tripwire. But when we got to Vietnam, he froze. I think he sensed the danger. All he wanted to do was find a place to pee. He spent most of his time in the kennel, eventually had to be put down. We couldn't risk releasing him to civilians since his specialized training could be used against us. I took on Missy. She was all business, especially when she had her harness on. Her number was 007. It was tattooed onto her paw. All the scout dogs had their identifying numbers tattooed there. We were together all the time. She slept next to me. Even when hot meals were helicoptered in for us, she wouldn't be enticed by it. She only ate her dog food and drank from my hand. One night on patrol, Missy alerted 3 times. A booby trap, enemy in front of us, and then an enemy machine gun as we were relocating. We were walking into a horseshoe ambush, an attack type that no one usually survives, but we did. No one got hit. Missy did her job. A few weeks later, our company was told to leave our backpacks, just take ammo, grenades, and water. We would be extracted before dark. Well, we ended up there for 3 days. It was miserable. We were in rice paddies, the pouring rain, no ponchos or blankets for protection or warmth. I reached a breaking point, crying, praying that God would take me out of the infantry. Finally, at daybreak, the Chinooks got us back to our base camp. We had pancakes for breakfast, and all was good again, easily forgetting my prayer. The next time we were out, we were hit by artillery, and a piece of shrapnel went right through my foot. I spent 2 months in the hospital. With those wounds, my time as an infantryman was over. I couldn't be in the field with heavy backpack, carrying all the ammo, grenades, and water for Missy. I'd be a liability to my unit. So I became a kennel master, caring for the dogs. The stress of scouting meant the dogs could only work 3 days at a time. I made sure they got rest, had fresh water, clean areas, were fed twice daily with a mix of horse meat and dog biscuits. As a kennel master, I hung around with some guys who were interested in photography. When I got R&R to Japan, I had $2,500 in my pocket to buy cameras and lenses for them. My mom sent me $800, money I had saved so far while in the Army, so I could buy a camera for myself. Up till then, I only used a Polaroid. I came back from Japan with a shiny new Pentax 35mm camera. I also found out that I lost my job as a kennel master. A fellow dog handler was suffering from shell shock, and he took over my job. By chance, on that flight from Tokyo, I sat next to a soldier who was a photo lab technician at the base next to ours. He developed some of my photos, and I pitched the idea to the captain, who was head of the communications for the brigade, about my being a combat photographer. After seeing my mounted 16x20 photos, he let me. My last 4 months in Vietnam, I was a combat photographer. As a fellow infantryman, I knew what the guys were going through, and there was a lot of camaraderie there. I always went out with the machine gunners because that's where we were exposed to the most intense combat. Machine gunners had the most dangerous position. They became the main targets. On January 31st, 1968, I went out with the machine gunners who were securing our perimeter, and I snapped a photo that was used on the cover of the Stars and Stripes, a daily newspaper, the next day. It was the first day of the Tet Offensive. In February 1968, 2 days before being discharged, I was assigned to cover Bob Denver of Gilligan's Island with the brigade. He had heard stories of the press and wanted to see for himself what it was really like. Bob gave me his home phone number, and when I got back, I called him. I visited him in the Hollywood Hills. I gave him 5x7 prints of his visit. Bob was happy to get the pictures. His wife, though, wouldn't even come out of the kitchen to see us, didn't offer a drink of water or anything, and showed no interest in the photos. It wasn't until years later that I realized she was negative about those serving in Vietnam. Passions sometimes went out over courtesy. Those strong passions even contaminated my old lifeguarding stomping grounds. None of my fellow lifeguards said a word about my service. I overheard a lifeguard railing against the war, and when he saw me, he stopped. I didn't say anything then. I regretted not saying something, explaining what Vietnam was really like. We were giving the South Vietnamese people freedom. In 1971, John Kerry was a witness before Congress as a Vietnam veteran against the war. His comments were accepted as truth. Once the Vietnam War was deemed an immoral war, our Vietnam experience was completely buried. I buried it too, till the rats made a mess. In 2010, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, an aggressive form, which was attributed to exposure to Agent Orange. Around that time, I started looking for my unit, the 49th Infantry Platoon Scout Dogs, just to see who was left and what stories they had. We connected. First in 2015 at the War Dog Reunion for all handlers who worked with attack, tracker, or scout dogs. Then in 2017, a War Dog Reunion only for scout dog handlers. At the 2017 reunion, I found out that Missy was killed by a sniper in December 1967. Her handler was hit in the head. His steel helmet saved him. The commanding officers of the 199th stated that our platoon leader, First Lieutenant John Gaines, had the best scout dog platoon in the 3rd Corps area, which consisted of 90% of the infantry serving in Vietnam. They also said we had unusually high casualty rate for a platoon. The 49th platoon might have been the best, but it came at a price. That makes my heart sink since I knew those guys. Now I still swim off the coast of California for exercise, still trying to piece together my experience in Vietnam, and thinking about the other 800,000 remaining veterans, their families, and how their story will be remembered.